Hello and welcome back to the Debrief. Today we're digging into the major players in episode 23, Tony and Gus. We've also been inundated with a massive amount of listener feedback this week, so we'll dive into your thoughts and theories on the episode too. Now, Ryan, I know it's only been a couple of days since you've recorded the episode, but any update on whether or not Tony spoke to the police?
Not as yet. I've got a number there to reach out to, and I plan on doing that over the next couple of days. I mean, I'm pretty confident the answer is going to be no, but, sort of just to cross that base off, I am going to check, but I was just having to get a number for a detective to call, so I didn't have to go through sort of the usual hoops. But yeah, so answer to that question, I'm not sure as yet. But I still don't believe that he would have, or that he has, is where I'm on with that right now. Yeah.
So I've got the map here, and one of the things I wanted to check with you, just give me a minute while I pull it up. So if Tony's property is on the right side of the river, as we're looking at this image, and so those lights he would have seen were towards that bird watching campground on the hill, is that correct?
Yeah, so Bella's just pulled up a Google Earth document here that's been prepared by the research team, and it's got a big block highlighted, which was Tony's block, back from the early 90s through until he subdivided it around 1999. And you can see in this block, in this image, you can see the Mary River running along the valley, and on both sides you've got mountain ranges covered in bush, and then the highlighted block is Tony's, and it's a big block, sort of 90 hectares, 200, which is over 200 acres, and it goes right through the bush. Now there's kind of two things here, which is interesting that you would have heard in the podcast, and this is the fact that Tony, he's told two different stories. There's the one story he told to Sarah about seeing the fire warden's wife, Anne Glassop, with this guy in the car. Then also, intriguingly, he told Ellie this other story about seeing lights on the hill the night that Anne disappeared. Now, my understanding from talking to Ellie is that these lights were on the other side of the valley. So on the other side, as in on the pie bun sort of side, on that side. And when she told me, and the way that he described it to her is, I think he described it as if there was sort of like earth moving machinery or something like that moving in the middle of the night that seemed odd. And I suppose the inference was that, perhaps someone's done something to Anne and then they're burying the body or something. Yeah, but it's an interesting one, that the fact that he has told these two different stories. They're both completely different, but they're both related to Anne's disappearance. And why would you sort of say one and not the other? But yeah, answer to your question, Bella, yeah, it's on the other side somewhere over there. I guess, yeah, where you've got that bird watching campground pin there, somewhere in that area, but we don't know exactly where, just somewhere over that direction.
And I think the more we look at the topography of the place as well, we'll be able to narrow it down a bit, but it's good knowing that he was looking across the river onto it, not behind his property onto it. Yeah,
not up into his property is my understanding, because if you look at Tony's property, I mean, when you break it down, I mean, it's probably 80% bush. And so if the lights, and actually when I spoke to his ex-partner, Lil, she asked the same question when we spoke about the lights, which I don't believe I included that in the podcast, but she was asking whether it was up in the hills behind the house as well, which would obviously be more interesting. And it's worth having a look at this as well while we're on it, and covering off that what I was saying in the podcast about how once you start to look at the greater picture of Tony's property and all this bush and all these areas, I came to the realization that trying to guess and pinpoint where this car might have been seen is fairly pointless. Initially, I thought, like, for some reason that it was down by the river, but then when I went back and sort of reviewed, I was like, oh, actually, that's not the case. That's not what Sarah had said. And then so it just seems sort of a bit of a waste of resources for us to try and guess at where the car could have been. But it's worth taking a look at the map yourself so you can see what we're talking about here. We're talking about a big area. And I'll just remind you as well that this episode is live on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and we're uploading these episodes every week now, in time with what you'll hear on Spotify or Apple or however you're listening. So if you do want to follow along with the video, jump over there and subscribe.
So I know you're getting ready to make a trip over there, and you mentioned in the episode that you're gonna hope you get lucky and catch some neighbors that may or may not have been there or have some knowledge. Being that it's a big area like that and fairly wooded, I mean, what do you think the odds are that? I mean, how many neighbors can we expect? You know what I mean? Have you actually been down that road?
So I've been down that road when I went with Debbie, but we only went as far as Gus's workshop. So when you drive down, you kind of drive down south from Kenilworth and from Little Yabba Creek car park, and you drive south. Yeah, good to keep that map open. And you drive south, and then you sort of just come across a little road, and then you're onto Eastern Mary River. But Gus's workshop was sort of right there. So we went to Gus's workshop. There was no one there. Then we turned and went back the other way. But if I'd continued driving down that road, just another couple kilometers, then we would have been at Tony's. So I haven't yet driven right past that exact spot. I think there's not going to be many neighbors, at most 4 or 5 in the greater area. And how many were there at that time? I'd say I don't even really know if there would have been any, because he had such a big block that he eventually chopped up. So it's a bit of a long shot, but at this point with that lead, I guess it's just one of those things that you have to do. You just have to check it off. Maybe Tony could have forged a relationship with some of these people over the years. And then there's the other thing too, right, is that if so far everything Tony said has sort of checked out when I've spoken to his friends and stuff, and in terms of, let's say with the subdivision, right, we could have spoken to, or we could have done the research, and the research team went and found a lot of details about the subdivision, and I had a listener send through some good information. We could have found out, oh, hang on, no, the subdivision happened in 2001, so it's not possible that this was related. But no, that wasn't the case. It actually happened at exactly the right time. So the question is, well, if that's right, and we haven't found anyone that says that Tony would make anything up, well, then could we possibly get lucky and find the people that he was with that day, that when he apparently saw this car? It's kind of the last hope, right? Could it be one of those people that now owns a block there? Could one of those people have been there that day looking at the property to buy? Possible. Would they remember anything?
So something that she said that was really interesting to me, because it's that question that we had, like, why would, if this happened, why wouldn't you go to the police? Why would you keep that to yourself? And she mentioned, some things that sounds like either the city council or city planning, something like that, where, have people like, Tony, you don't need to be doing that. That's illegal. Like something that he was doing. So the thought kind of occurred to me. Like, obviously, I don't think he's cooking meth or anything, but I think if you do have some issues like that with the subdivision that you're doing, you may not want to draw that attention to your property, right? Because if that is a legitimate thing and something he's trying to kind of maneuver around, if we're really searching, because I'm like you, if you have something that significant, why wouldn't you go to the police with that? Why wouldn't you make more noise about that? And so that, kind of led me to that, the possibility that could, make sense if he's not trying to make a whole lot of noise about it.
I mean, it takes me back to a chat Ryan and I had recently with a journalist from there, and she just said in passing, you know, a lot of people growing cannabis in these valleys. You know, it's quite desolate back then. So you could, you know, have some crops or be doing something nefarious on your property, and not many people would notice, or people would sort of just look past it. So it could have been something like that. I think that's the right track of thinking, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, that's you know, and I hadn't even crossed my mind. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, so the story was that Lil was saying that, and this is the case in a lot of rural areas, even where I live now, you know, you can't just subdivide up a million blocks everywhere. Like, there's rules that you can only go down so low. And I think in that area, the limit was 200 acres. So if he, was it 200 or maybe 20 acres or whatever it was, there's obviously a limit. And it sounds like Tony was doing something a little bit dodgy and doing it smaller lots or something. Yeah. And I mean, but even, yeah, going further to what Bella said, I mean, like Lil said, I mean, Tony lives this bohemian lifestyle. He's living out there. I mean, he probably smokes a bit of weed. I'm just assuming. You know, maybe he didn't, but maybe he has a few plants around or something. You know, I guess, and these are things we're just speculating. But yeah, there could be any number of reasons that we're not aware of as to why you're like, I don't maybe need to bring the cops in here. What I saw doesn't really matter. Like, it's not relevant. You know, and that's an important thing to think too, is that across so many cases that I do, is that you always see that same thing. It's like, oh, I know this little thing, but it doesn't really matter, you know, because they don't necessarily know the bigger context of the case. Perhaps he genuinely just thought that what he had seen that day was just not really relevant, like didn't really matter. Not worth, bringing the cops around to his property. Because as well, and there's also that angle that, I mean, well, if this was on his property, well, does it, you know, this might actually mean the cops are going to come out and probably turn his property upside down. They're going to probably search through the bush. They're going to search everywhere through his property. Maybe you just don't want that. Yeah, that's a fair comment, to be honest. And yeah, if you look at this is a good picture you've got up now. So Bella's got a picture up on screen now, and it's yeah, you can get an idea of Tony's property. And you know, there's a big ridge that runs up the back there. It's very, very bushy, cool property, and it runs right onto a river there. But I'd bet there'd be plenty of good places to hide a body there if someone had chosen that. But you could see how, I mean, you can see little access ways all over the place. It'd be easy enough to find a little road or some place to go. So behind, there's a yellow line here. There's a ridge or something, or an area called Snake Creek. I always like this in Australia, because when you go around, you'll see things named like this, and I always think, well, that got a name somehow. Probably someone got bitten by a snake there or something, and you know.
And there was a Chinaman down the way, perhaps. That Chinaman.
Yeah, Chinaman Creek, right there.
Would have been some of the old work camps, maybe.
Do you know, a little side note here? You remember John that I met, the hippie sort of real bohemian guy from earlier episodes from a while back, and he found he had that feeling about Selena, and they went out to the bush, and he took me out into the bush with him. If you remember him, we were driving from his place out to go to this place that out in the bush where he was taking me to, where he had this feeling, and we went past something like this on the road, and there was a little sign saying, I can't remember what it was called now, something Creek or whatever, like this, like some kind of interesting name. And as we drove past, I said this exact thing. I was like, that's so interesting. Like, I was like, there's probably a story behind that sign and why that sign's like that. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I put that sign there. Like, he had just made up a sign with a story that it was their own story that they'd had. They just made a sign that looks like an official sign and just put it there and named it so. I thought that was quite funny. But that's just a little bit of side lore. Let's scroll down now. Shall we show the proximity between this location, which was Tony's place, and where Gus's workshop is? So you may need to go out a little bit wider. Probably, we should have chucked another pen on it. Yeah, let me, while Bella's bringing that up, should we pull a, do you know how to find that address, Bella?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. While we do that, should we go through a couple of questions, Jacob?
Yeah.
And thanks for all the feedback too. We're sort of getting to the point with the feedback, like there's almost too much. We can't even get through it all in an episode, but we'll try and pick out the best stuff or just some things that are different, because people do ask the same questions, but honestly, we appreciate all of them and we do read them all. Let's just start at the top here. This is from Crichton. Really enjoying season 6. One thing that keeps popping up in my mind is, why did Mia ask Derek Sam if he raped Jess? Was that something she thought was a possibility? If that was in his character or something she thought was possible, then for me it feels easier to tie the three together as sexually motivated. Jess was an opportunity, and I thought the other two seemed so different, but if the common factor was sexual assault, well, yeah, thanks for that, Crichton. And I guess the answer to that is, I'll add one little thing to that. Mia told me that, I don't recall if this was something that we included in the podcast, but she'd said that up in Bamaga, where Derek Sam came from, it's like a different world up there. It's kind of like the Wild West a little bit, and not in a good way. And she said that oftentimes guys up there, a typical Friday or Saturday night might be going and getting ridiculously drunk somewhere, and then they would just grab a girl and just effectively rape them. But in that world, they didn't sort of see it that way, that was just kind of the way life was. And she sort of had always thought, did Derek get drunk this night and kind of just revert back to that world where he's from? And, but, her words were, but she also said, that it's a thing up there that a lot of these guys, that like white girls up in Bamaga, like that's kind of what their dream kind of thing. And we're getting into some dark territory here, but this is just the reality of what she told me it's like up there. And she just said she's always just thought that, did he get really so drunk that night that he's just reverted back and he's grabbed Jess, and then after he's done what he's done, he's realized this is a white girl, you can't do this, like this is not going to work out like it does back up there. I'm going to need to kill her, basically.
By the time this conversation happens, I mean, Mia had spoken to the police at that point. That's why she's having this conversation, right?
I mean,
that?
I wouldn't know the exact timeline of where this comment came in. I don't know if this was a recorded one or if this is one where she was just recording.
Because my thought is, it very well could have just been, fed or suggested to her by the police.
100%. Yeah.
That was my thought. If it happened after, because a lot of these conversations, or at least one in particular that we know that she had with Derek, was if I'm not mistaken, it was a direct result of the cops asking her to do that. Right. So if that's already happened, then that, it very well could have just been suggested by them.
And if you think about it too, it's kind of a question that a cop would ask. She doesn't say, did you have sex with her? They want an incriminating statement. Did you rape her? If he says yes, that's game, set, match right there, So that, you're probably right there. That sounds like something that could have been fed to her. But I think the bigger thing here with Crichton saying is, like that the sexual motivation is what may be tying all of these things together, and I think that's totally fair. It seems to be the logical reason that these things could be connected. It's hard with Selena's case because we just know so little about it and what had happened. But yeah, I think it's I think if Derek Sam is responsible for all three, then I think that probably is the motivation there. I don't think he would be someone who's killing people because he enjoys killing people.
And I would assume that that's the that's the road that they went down, because again, the question for me again becomes, okay, that answers your motivation question, or at least your theory, but you still have to make that hold up in court, right? You still have to have something that proves it, because I mean, you could technically put the sexual motivation on just about anybody in that situation. You go, well, I mean, they have a sexual history, right? Or sexual assault history, or whatever that is. You could apply that to a lot of people. So you'd still have to prove that. But I think it certainly, justifies the rabbit hole that they jumped down, so to speak.
Yeah. Thanks, Crichton, for that one. Next question here. This is from Petra. In season 6, there was discussion about the young lady camping at the creek, and the next day it was noticed that her tent had moved to higher ground and there was no further sightings of the young lady. Was the tent inspected by police? Did they determine who it belonged to? So you'd be referring to Greg's, Greg's story. So just that story. So basically, Greg, they saw this, then they went home. This was many weeks before Selena weeks before Selena was realized she was missing. So that tent was never sort of flagged as being anything suspicious or anything. So we don't know. It was just obviously that tent just disappeared, or the girl came back, or who knows. But by the time, they only reported that as being suspicious after Selena had gone missing, which was weeks later. So that tent, whoever that person was, the tent was all long gone by that point. So it was never inspected and, never part of the case, I guess you would say. Okay, now we're going to get into something here that that people have been very vocal about. There's been too many comments about this that I'm not going to include them all. The bonnet. Now, I feel like, Jacob, we might have been, I think we might be in the mind.
I was gaslit by you two. You made me feel crazy.
For sure. Yeah, we definitely dove off in a hornet's nest on that one. And now I'm going to be honest with you. Now I'm questioning whether or not, as a man in this world, am I equipped to survive? I don't do that, but apparently a lot of people do. So
let me say, okay, I just want to say that I'm aware that you can touch a bonnet to see how long the car, if someone's been using a car. Like, I get that part of it. I suppose, and I think Jacob's probably in the same thing as me, that to us, it seems unusual that you would do that in anything other than an extraordinary situation. That's like, I would only do it if I was like seriously worried about my partner or where she might be, then I would do it. But as a day-to-day, I wouldn't do it all the time. Like, I would feel like a creeper if I was doing that. But we're all different, apparently, because a lot of you disagree with that, and you do it on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I'm a tech guy, so my thought is, okay, well, my wife has an Apple Watch. Let me see where she's at. You know what I mean? Like, touching the hood of the car, that's an antiquated method to me. You know what I mean?
It must be a country thing, because I grew up in the South Wairarapa, and that was sort of, you're driving long ways, don't always have reception. You're going to touch a bonnet, guys. Like, it's all right. It's okay. I'm not a psychopath. I just touch bonnets.
Okay, and I mean, we are talking about 1999 here, so right. Obviously internet was not barely, like there would be no internet or anything out there. So, okay. But we do have comments going both ways here. And I think it's important to, say that Jacob and I are at least partly, and I've thought about this a bit actually, and I'm going to come to Eric's defense in a minute. This person says, who is this from? Holly from Canada. Thanks for the message. I think you've messaged us before, Holly. Thank you. I don't think Eric checking the bonnet would be unusual. Coming across Anne's car in an odd location. I'd add that it's not an odd location though. Feels like a quick, natural way to gauge how recently it was there. Given his background as a ranger, he'd be used to reading small cues and building a picture from them. That kind of work can also create a bit of a heightened vigilance where checking details like that becomes instinctive. Yep, 100%. I agree with everything you've said there. Apart from the odd location, it's not really an odd location. I think she used to walk her dogs at that spot, so it would be a normal location. But I'm going to impart my little piece, my 2 cents on this once we get through. Here we go. And then this is perfect follow-up to this one. From Nikki, I just wanted to share my experience with the Eric feeling the bonnet thing. I have an ex who did this. He would say things such as, I know you went somewhere because your engine is warm. I felt the bonnet. It happened a few times, and even saw him checking the warmth in my bonnet myself. He turned out to be narcissistic, possessive, jealous, and even stalked me after we broke up. You know, so there's something coming from the other angle. You know, it depends which way you look at it.
I
Okay,
did
so
have
now,
an interesting thought. Did he touch it because he thought his DNA would be implicated? So he just said right out, I touched it.
I don't know. DNA was so like unknown at that point. I don't think, personally, his DNA would be all over that car anyway, probably.
Yeah, no, right. Dispel that one.
But here I'm going to add something I thought about after, you know, we were getting these comments, and it sort of started to make sense to me a bit. And I thought, okay, well, let's, first of all, in order for us to think this theory, we have to assume that Eric is being honest about everything, and what he said is exactly what happened. So let's just do that for a second. Eric, they're agreed that they're supposed to meet for breakfast in the morning, or for a coffee in the morning, or this is something they do fairly regularly. Anne doesn't show up. So he goes to her house. Oh, she's not there. The gates are open. So then he drives past and sees the car parked down there. Now, obviously you'd think, okay, well, she's gone for a walk. But perhaps I thought, well, I suppose if she hasn't shown up for a coffee that was agreed on, he's gone to her house and she's not there and the gates are open. Maybe that is reason to be worried enough, or to think, let me go down and just check how long she's been there. Because if the bonnet's cold, maybe she's hurt herself in the bush or something. Feels the bonnet and it's warm, and so maybe he thinks, oh, okay, she's obviously only just got here. Maybe she decided not to come for a coffee this morning for whatever reason. And so I thought, okay, that actually could all logically make perfect sense. And then he drives off, and it's not until later on he comes back and sees the car is still there, and then realizes, hang on, something's not right here. What do you think? I mean, I thought that actually would make sense. It would explain why he's touched the bonnet, because the road is sort of up here when you drive past. The car park, you have to drive down into the car park, you know, it's not like it's just right there. You have to make a bit of an effort to drive down to do it. That's why I thought it seemed kind of possessive. I was like, why would you go to that effort? But then when I thought about the other factors, that if he was being 100% truthful about they're supposed to meet, she wasn't at home, yeah, maybe it does make sense.
Well, I think these kind of conversations that, you know, at face value may seem super detail oriented and sometimes trivial, because this particular season we're dealing with cases with so little to work with. I think this kind of speculation has to happen. This kind of discussion has to happen, because I think that's where we're going to uncover things. I think when it comes to the hood of the car, I think it's one of those things where there's reason to believe either side of the fence on that. So I almost feel like that's a detail that really doesn't help us at all anymore. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it's just so wide open. At this point, I don't feel like it can really progress anything. I think there are other things that could suggest that Eric was a certain way or another with the way that he dealt with Anne, his personality. But yeah, I think this is one of those things that at the end of the day, the detail that I think is we can conclusively say, okay, it helps us with this. If we know when he went there, and if he is telling the truth that her hood was warm, all right, then it helps us with her timeline. But I think that's really as far as it's going to take us.
I agree. I think, I think you're exactly right. Like, you can speculate all you want about all the different bits and pieces and things, but I think ultimately that's the only thing that we can really actually look at and say, okay, this is something that, yeah, exactly. Like, we know his timeline. If we say, okay, he's honest, and let's be honest, he probably is, then yeah, the bonnet really tells her timeline. And that's where the interesting thing comes in. So if we look at it from the angle that, okay, well then, if he's being honest, well, then now it becomes very interesting as to why that bonnet would be worn. You know, and I'll add just something here. Christopher sent me through an email yesterday. He's a local. We actually heard him in the podcast at one point, and he just said, I just listened to the recent episode about Tony Ray and the possibility of the last sighting of Anne Glassop. I noticed that Tony Ray referred to her as the wife of the fire warden. Just for your information, the chief ranger of the national park is also always the district fire warden. So he would have almost certainly be referring to Eric Glassop. So just to cover off that point that Tony had mentioned, the wife of the fire warden. So obviously Eric Glassop was the chief park ranger as well. So if what Christopher's saying is true, then that job becomes the other job as well, which would make sense when you're working in that rural, those rural areas, that a fire is probably going to be related to forest as well most of the time. And also I think most of the people in these rural areas are probably members of different volunteer fire groups and things like that. But I think
to me, it really, that is one of the things in Tony's, this story that involving Tony that really gives it a lot of credibility to me, because that's a very specific way to refer to her. Do you know what I mean? There's a familiarity there. There's a true recognition there that you can track. So to me, like, that's what leads me to believe that, okay, we have the question, he told this story to this person, but didn't these other people. But if that person that he told, he referred to her as that, he told the story. I don't think it was, it wasn't, it was made up. I think that came from somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And on that as well, I want to add that for me, that also gives credibility to Sarah, because she didn't, in some ways, a person might look at that lead and say in the story and say, oh, it's a bit vague because he didn't say Anne's name. Well, if she was not a credible witness, she would have just added that part in. She would have said he saw Anne Glassop in the car, but she didn't say that. And she said, this is what she said. And it made me feel confident that is the truth, because people will embellish a story to help it make sense and to make it work better. And she didn't do that. And initially I remember being a bit concerned. I thought, oh, okay, well, it's not rock solid. I mean, I feel like it is now because we know the fire warden and so on. But yeah, from both angles, I think it's just a tiny detail, but I think it is important. And okay, here we go. So oh yeah, here we go. So Bella's now pulled up the map, and we can see we've got 3 points here that we can see. So we can see where Anne's Glassop car was found. And just to note too, we will get the war room updated so that Gus's work shed is listed on there, as well as Tony's place, if we haven't got that already. But here you can see where the car was found. You drive down to Gus's work shed there. Yeah, so sorry, and then you drive further on to where Tony's place was. And you can see it's the proximity, it can't really be denied as to where that was, right? Like, you could imagine if you were to meet up, you just drive somewhere that's a little bit further away from where you are, somewhere far enough that you can find a spot where you're isolated, but not too far away. And I feel like that's basically about the exact distance. You can't deny it. Like I said in that episode, overlap, I think that's the right name for it, because it is where these leads sort of just overlap just a little bit. And
the way that terrain is with all that bush there, I mean, if you're trying to hide something and you're searching for a place to hide something, right? You don't have to go far to be like, okay, I think this is enough. Do you know what I mean? Because of the way that it's just laid out, man. You don't have to go far to make something be hidden. It also, from what we've heard of Gus, he doesn't seem like the most organized and proactive guy. He doesn't. If this is Gus at work here, it would be surprising to me if he had thought to go, to really take her a good ways. I think he doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. from the stories that we're hearing, he's like, oh my God, I got to take care of this. And you know, what's the easiest way to do this? And that certainly seems like it falls in line.
I think as well, like, you know, and, you know, it's important that one little thing you said there, Jacob, like, if it is, you know, like, we're not saying that this is what happened. We're just saying that, you know, we're just looking at these leads and saying, well, how do they overlap? Like, what is sort of consistent here? It's just a theory at this point based on, you know, based on these witnesses. I was going to say too, and I mean, it's hard, you know, you don't want to speculate too much and try and guess at things, but, you know, like, has Gus, if this has happened, right, like, has he gone there this day with the purpose of murdering Anne? I mean, perhaps not. That's probably not maybe what's happened. Like, perhaps has he just flipped, like they've gone to meet, and who knows, has Anne decided to say, no, I don't want to see you anymore, like, this is the end of it, and then he's cut it off? Or, I mean, who knows, right? Like, who knows? And there's a lot of things that you still have to try and figure out. But I think at the end of it, after listening to his brother Stu speak, and you think, okay, well, we've got this guy in this proximity, plus with Debbie's story, he made these comments that he knew Anne, or Annie as he referred to her, all of these things together, and just that proximity as well, just, you know, it's so interesting when you look at all of that, and you've got to at least consider the possibility. Yeah. But
I think that if we're talking about Gus, I mean, this latest episode, there's so much to unpack with the people that you spoke with and what we heard. What's interesting to me is I keep hearing the whole rumor, like, yeah, I heard he murdered somebody in Australia. Okay. The next person says the same thing. Does no one share any more detail to that rumor? I mean, I know Stu, it sounded like you communicated with him via text or messaging, right? So you can't really dig deeper. Hey, expound on that a little bit, right? So you may be limited there, but you've heard it a couple times. Is that as far as that rumor has gone with anybody?
Yeah, and you know, I think it's important as well. Like, I sort of took away from that, we know that Gus went to prison in Australia, right? And we know Gus has always been somewhat of an enigma. People don't know what he's doing, his family and friends. People may have drawn the conclusion, or the rumor may have come from the fact that people found out he was in prison in Australia. They didn't know what for. And as a result, maybe they just made the leap. Oh, yeah, it's because he killed someone. He was always like a scary, crazy dude. You know, I wonder if the rumor came from that, or if it came from any, you know, I thought that could be possibly where that's come from, and that's why nothing's come from it. And the answer to your question is no, like, no one's ever elaborated on it. It's always just been like, oh yeah, I'd heard that he'd killed someone. But I think as well that the crime that he was convicted of in Australia, a sexual crime, involved a woman, and there was a lot of privacy around this and the woman that was involved. So I don't think a lot of details were released about this for her sake. And as a result, that may have created that vacuum of information, and people have just sort of filled in their own stories somewhere on the line. Yeah,
so you're
so
seeing,
there's no
you're
more
seeing,
to that, what you've heard.
You're viewing that incident as well as the rumor about possibly murdering someone is probably the same thing.
Possibly. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say probably. I'm just saying, like, I just thought, thinking like real, like, it makes sense. People may have jumped to that conclusion, as you know, that because Gus, he just seems like such an enigma that no one knows where he is or what he's doing. It just made me think.
He must be in New Zealand. If he's a 501, he must be in New Zealand. It'd be bail conditions.
Yeah. He'll be in New Zealand somewhere. I think that's what we're all pretty confident on. The search goes on. And you know, like, I'll just add a point here too, that obviously Gus is not his real name. Now, you may wonder why I've not included his name, and there's a reason for that, and it's because at this point this is just theories and you know, and speculation. And obviously if we were to release his real name, that might be helpful to find him, but it's highly prejudicial stuff could ruin someone's life if I was to put this stuff out and it turns out he has nothing to do with this. You know, and these are all factors that come into this kind of work. His nickname was Gus, as there'll be thousands of people that are also called Gus around. So, you know, you're never going to identify someone just because they're called Gus. But that's why I've not released his name until I got something that I felt was like really hard proof of involvement. Then we would make that step. But until that happens, we'll just try and find him, you know, in our own way, and we are. But just to fill in that, and throughout many cases, the names that you hear are not actually the names of people for various reasons. Yeah.
When he talks about him coming home, if I'm not mistaken, he came home from China. I believe is the way that Stu told it. And he, for a time, he was really paranoid about who was coming to the door.
Yeah.
What do we know the timing there when this occurred?
So I've just recently gone back to Debbie, just last night actually, just to try and clarify to her best knowledge his timeline that she can, that she knew of where he was, you know, 100%. It is really hard with his timeline, where everything fits exactly. We know that, yeah, he came back from China at some point. Let me just say, yeah, we're going to try and lock in that timeline a lot better. I know that he was in New Zealand. Their father died sometime just after 2012, somewhere in there. And Stu mentions going and finding him. So he must have been in New Zealand around about 2013, 14, something like that. My understanding was he'd gone to prison in Australia in 2017. So somewhere in that mix, he ended up in China for a few years. But yeah, we'll try to get to the bottom of the timeline a bit better. But apparently his movements in China, he was a ghost there as well. So that's proving fairly hard to follow at this point.
And I know she shared through the friend of his, or the high school classmate you talked to.
Yeah.
Right. That she hadn't heard from him, but would it be worth reaching out, or have you already reached out to his sister?
Yes, and was pretty much told that she's been estranged from him for a long, long time, like 20 years, and she doesn't know anything, so there's not really much point. Doesn't want to get involved.
Gotcha.
But that did try. I think he sounds like he's such a toxic person that these people are probably scared to anything that might, you know, bring him back into their lives. Let's have just a quick look here. We're not going to be able to get through all of these questions and things in this episode, but if we don't now, we'll put them onto the next episode, and we'll try to. Who we got here? Lisa just listened to the latest episode about who saw Anne last. And I'll just add a little point here as well. By the time you hear this episode, if you're listening to this episode of the free podcast, you're actually hearing it a week after it's been broadcast. So for subscribers, they get the podcast episode a week earlier. So some of the questions that you may ask, you may be asking them a week sort of late. Still send them through, but sometimes I've seen people that message after the free episode comes out, and I think that maybe they're not aware that this actually went out a week earlier. So it's a good reason to subscribe, because you're right up to play. The day the episode comes out is the day you're getting that information with everyone else. Sometimes people send through, they try to help, and they'll go and look things up, not realizing, and emailing us and not realizing that information already came out a week earlier, and we've already sort of gone down that path. So just another reason to support the podcast and subscribe. But anyway, this one from Lisa, just thinking from a different angle, not Anne having an affair, but the other person could have been married and could have been caught, or his partner confronted, and this person could have contacted Anne. Yeah, okay. I mean, again, you know, you can sort of play the guessing game of what might have happened. Yeah, I mean, who knows? And I mean, and that's the thing with this kind of thing, right? And this is true crime podcasting 101. I mean, you play a lot of time trying to guess and figure out theories in your head. Any one of them could be correct at this point. You know, I mean, if Anne was meeting in this car, if this is true, what Tony saw with another guy,
it would seem that this was she wasn't under any duress, more than likely. It didn't seem like that anyway, from what Tony's described. So she was willing to be there, more than likely. So it could have, who knows what it could have been.
Yeah, and Julie from Queensland actually wrote in and gave us her thoughts on Eric. So could Eric have used his position in the community to possibly start the search for Anne in the wrong direction? We know he was friends with the police, so could he have either manipulated them using his trust, help, and his experienced position, or was blaming the Aboriginal man with a history of terrible behaviour for Anne's disappearance would have been an easy one to attribute to Derek Sam without much effort. Conscious or subconscious, racism is very real in Australia and overly more back then. So sort of two parts to that. One, looking at Eric and his friendship with some of the police officers, and then two, was it easier to pin it on Derek Sam as an Aboriginal? So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
This is one of the, if you're hinging it on Eric being responsible, then of course it would make perfect sense. All of that would make perfect sense. I mean, he was one of the main people in charge of the SES search groups. I think even when I spoke to Leon, I'm not sure if it was on the podcast or not, but I think that was part of his sort of thoughts, was that, Eric was responsible, then he was in control of those searches and where they were searching. So then, of course, he's not going to leave them in the area where her remains might be. I guess if you're going down the path of saying, I believe Eric was responsible, well, then that theory would all be perfectly true. So I guess it's just whether you're saying that Eric did it or he didn't. If he did do it, then that would all be 100% true. Derek would be a perfect scapegoat.
Where was Eric? I know we haven't gone too deep into this, but where was Eric the night Jessica disappeared and when Selena disappeared? Do we know?
Oh, I don't know, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I don't think that's. I would never draw that bow myself.
I think we go back to Eric a lot. Ryan, in your opinion, outside of now that we've kind of got past the whole car hood thing, what are the things that really point you in the direction of suspicion for him? The hard details that you've heard. Obviously, it sounds like at least one of the kids had made a comment. I think Dad had something to do with it, right? What are the things that you have heard that leads to? Because obviously, with the recent episodes and conversations in the debriefs, there's a lot of questions about Eric, right? But I always kind of like to recenter, because you can get lost in this. You can get lost in that conversation and lose sight of, okay, but what do we have though? What are the details that you find that are like, okay, this makes me question, this makes me question. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's so good, and you do need to refocus, which is why, like a while ago, I put out that sort of evidence episode, because after Laurie's story, sometimes you can get lost in new theories. They're interesting and sort of exciting. It's the wrong word, but sometimes you do have to go back and refocus and just remember, some important details. And I think it's when I first started this case, my first thought was like, Eric, I mean, come on, like he was the person there the night before, like estranged partner. It sort of made sense. Then you sort of looked and it's like, okay, looks like the cops looked into this. Everyone I'd spoken to had said Eric was a great guy. Like Eric was a great guy. A lot of people that have not been in the podcast, you've never heard them, but they all said the same thing. Eric wouldn't have done this. He's not that kind of guy. And trust me, he didn't have that kind of temperament that he could do something like that. But then, of course, when Leon came along and I spoke to Leon, it was like, whoa, it was like a slap in the face. Leon's story was very powerful and emotional, and it's hard to deny that kind of thing. And he had those sort of interactions with Eric, the comments like karma and things like this and the keychain and stuff. And that sort of seriously made me question it, through a new lens. You know, but I think when you sort of like step back and I look at it and I look at the bonnet now and I think, like you're saying, I think I can apply a bit more of a reasoning to that situation now and say, I'm not really seeing much myself. Like I don't really, unless there's some other evidence I'm not aware of. Yeah, I'm not really seeing a lot other than just like, hey, it could be possible. For some reason, there could be motivation there, perhaps. But yeah, there's not really much apart from Leon's powerful story, right? But even Leon said, "Hey, look, this is just my story. This is my experience." You know, he said about Eric's son Jono saying, "You know, I think my dad did it." Powerful stuff, but I've not heard it from Jono yet. You know, I'd love to, and I'm still trying to talk to him, but. Yeah, I'd say an answer to that question. Yeah, there's not really a lot. I feel like the bonnet thing's probably explained now. I even just spoke to someone the other day. Actually, let me just quickly read this. I had asked about Eric because recently I've been trying to find a bit more about Eric and a bit more of his character and getting that through, because I think that could be quite important. Well, it is important, so we don't end up with sort of a completely one-sided view of Eric. And I'm just trying to quickly find this. Give me 2 seconds. Here we go. This person is a local who knew both of them. She doesn't want to get involved in the podcast, but we did exchange a couple of emails. She said here about Eric briefly. Eric couldn't talk about Anne without crying, even before his death. He was a gentle man. I think the right person was arrested, this person said, but in my opinion, he had accomplices, one of which is dead too. Obviously, be referring to there, Mark Johnson, but this was just a local. I know who this person is. They have a good character, the person I was emailing, and, you know, they said Jarrett was a gentle man, and that's what I've heard from everyone that sort of knew him, apart from Leon. You know, but I think Leon's story is complex because it's woven between, you know, obviously the stepfather and stepson relationship and everything. And but you know, the general thing that comes through is that Eric was a gentle, quiet man. Yeah, so it's not proof of innocence, but certainly not proof of guilt anywhere there that I can see.
One is certainly, you know, I mean, if he's under the same roof, you know, kids see a lot of things, man. They see, unfortunately, they see the bad, you know, the ugly underbelly of what could be a good relationship. It just relationships are emotional, so the kids have a front row seat to that. So you're definitely gonna have a whole different stable of insight there. But to me, I think this Eric conversation is something that what we or what kind of these podcast investigations, these true crime podcast seasons can take things a step further than you know. I think a lot of times law enforcement dismiss speculation very quickly. Like, well, there's no point in that. Where there's nothing we can do with that. So it's almost too quick sometimes. We don't have that handcuff. However, I do think that there is a healthy amount of it and a healthy way to go about it, so that we don't go so far the other direction that we end up, gosh, you know, at the end of the day, you're getting all kinds of insight. You're the guy running around trying to figure out if any of it, you know, so we're going to run Ryan ragged, you know, chasing down all these, and at the end of the day, they're speculative. But I think this really highlights the need for that, okay, we have to be able to kind of curate that speculation and know what things are, what thought processes are worth tracking down and can be beneficial to us right now. And I think Eric is just kind of a prime example of that there's definitely some things to look into here. But I'd hate to go so far as to essentially just concoct these scenarios that really have nothing to them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, I hope, and I mean, I hope that what sets this podcast apart is that we are not one of those podcasts that will just dive into wild speculation. You know, like, while you framed it perfectly there, like, the police will require a much higher sort of level of evidence before they'll even sort of look at something. We don't have those handcuffs. We can go down that path a little way and sort of speculate a bit, but I think I always try to look at something with like a realistic, objective sort of like view, and it's not our job to try and railroad people or come up with like crazy theories for no real reason. And you know, I've said it before in the past, you know, it's not a game, it is serious, and the outcomes of what we do are potentially huge. But yeah, in terms of Eric's, it's a prime example, and that's why I feel a little bit like it's important to balance out what we've heard about Eric, because at the moment it's been very one-sided in terms of only hearing potentially bad things, and I think we need to hear more from the other side, and let's hear more from people that knew him and what kind of character he had, because in my experience out there in the field talking to people is that it's all positive, but unfortunately most of those people are people who don't want to speak on the podcast or whatever, for whatever reason. But yeah, you sort of, with a lot of these things, you just urge caution and a bit of restraint in terms of like how quickly you dive down these paths. You know, and we're going to go back over some things by the end of the podcast, and again, like, and reframing some of the reasons why, you know, the police looked at Derek Sam and Glassop's case, because there are some little things there. Of course, it's not a lot, otherwise they would have charged him. But let's, you know, by the end, we'll go back over some of these things. And as I try to do by the end, we'll go over each lead and each case and how it could possibly be relevant. But yeah, I think
as some of these thoughts do come up about Eric, and we do kind of uncover some speculation that's worth looking into. I know it was a really tough, heavy interview to do with Leon, right? But that being said, is while you may have to be cautious and really selective when how you do it, would getting his insight further ever be on the table?
Yeah, so Leon and I still talk fairly regularly.
Okay.
So I mean, we message each other often enough, and talk on the phone every once in a while. So we have kept up a communication line the whole time. He's aware of what's coming through the podcast, the different bits and pieces. You know, he'll message me and say, "Oh, I don't agree with that," or I don't, you know. And even in terms of the Gus thing, he knows about this. He heard the story, and he's just imparting his own opinion. He was like, "Oh, I don't know about that," you know, like, because of this and that. But you know, it's just his view at the time. And I just come back to it and think, you know, like, I think not every child knows what their parents up to, you know, all the time. And I think we might assume we do, but now as a parent, you realize that, you know, like, your parents live their own lives and their kids probably aren't aware what they're up to a lot of the time. But yeah, certainly Leon coming back in and giving his opinion before the end, we'll definitely do that. We'll get Leon on and we'll chat about a lot of this stuff and just get his opinion. And you know, when we come to sort of wrapping up this season, when that might happen. Yeah. Okay. Good chat, team. Does anyone else have anything they want to add before the end?
Just one little thing for Leon. Again, this is from Julie. I think Anne's son's name is Leon. I've got nothing but respect for him. As a mother, my heart aches for him. So yeah, that's the core of what we do. That's the core of the premise. There's families out there still looking for answers. And yeah, Leon, we love you and thank you for talking to us.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the amount of messages that I've had, you know, and to be fair, before the debrief started, or else we would have spoken about it more. But the amount of you that have messaged saying supportive messages like that for Leon, you know, people saying that that's literally the best interview they've ever heard in their lives on any podcast, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of love out there for Leon for sure. And yeah, you know, like sitting there and going through that interview, and you know, it was the most emotional, powerful interview I've ever been a part of. You know, and we're sitting there doing the interview right where Anne's car was last seen. You know, so it's very emotional stuff. You know, and Leon's story is just a tragic one in so many ways. But he's risen up, and you know, he's doing very well in life now. But you know, obviously, still incredibly difficult for him. Yeah. Okay.
All right, guys. Now, Ryan, I know you're off on another trip, so we might let you go now.
I'm going to get off this call, upload this episode for release, and then I'm going to get on a plane and we're going back. We're going to chase some leads, and we've got some hopefully some exciting stuff. So yeah, I'll see you next week, hopefully with some fresh insight into the cases. See you guys.